Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book of stars. Open up the
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking. I'm your host, SHERI Horn Hasan of Karmic Evolution Astrology, and I'm coming to you on July 28th, 2022 from Contact Talk Radio. Just a quick reminder that this show aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution. First, as usual, my housekeeping stuff, which is to tell you that you can listen to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking podcast anytime by simply going to my website at karmicevolution.com and clicking on the upper right-hand portion of the banner labeled podcast. From there, you can scroll down the page and hear the most recent show, either live or recorded, and or search the archived listings for past shows. You know, things you might have missed or to which you'd like to listen again. And while you're there, you'll see now at the top of the page that there is a downloadable freebie, which might interest you. I know a lot of people who are listening are not novices at astrology, but it's a little document that I put together after an interview with Stephen Forrest a couple of years ago. That was a sidebar at the time labeled "How to Keep Your Sun Sign Happy," which is just simply some friendly advice for every sun sign from renowned astrologer Stephen Forrest about what each sun sign needs to, well, do to be happy, right? So it's short, it's cute, and, I thought you guys might enjoy it. Now, of course, it will sign you up for my weekly newsletter, Conversations About Consciousness, but you can unsubscribe anytime. But if you go into the podcast page, and we've had some technical difficulties these past few weeks, again, I apologize to listeners, but we're still working that kinks out, and between weather disruptions and technological stuff, most of you who listened last week know that the Uranus is conjunct the North Node this week, and Mars is joining it by August 1st, which means it's waxing strongly now. So there's just a lot of unexpected stuff. So mea culpa, I ask your patience and your forgiveness, and we'll get it straightened out soon. Okay, finally, I am offering still my 1-hour discounted Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading, and that's for listeners only, and it's for 1 hour for only $99. So if you'd like to find out your soul's true purpose, how to move forward to your highest destiny in this lifetime, what may be or have been holding you back based on old soul conditioning, whether it's from earlier in this lifetime or from past life karma, and or you have you're looking for insight about current relationships or just relationships in general, your career, your job, your finances, or your health, and how the natal chart can show us, again, what might have tripped you up or vexed you, as Stephen Forrest likes to say, that the soul is carried over into this lifetime. So if you're interested in gaining greater awareness through the use of astrological insight in order to bring greater happiness and satisfaction into your life, it's easy when you take advantage of Karmic Evolution's Natal Insight reading for 1 hour for only $99. And you'll find easy access to this offer on my website at karmicevolution.com/karmic99. / I guess it's a / I don't know. I hate it's like I'm a grammarian because I'm an editor, but which one is it? I don't know. It's like, sort of like a left-handed, right-handed thing. I think it's a forward slash, but it's at karmicevolution.com/karmic99 at almost half the regular price. I love to say that conscious awareness has never been so easy or so affordable. Okay, let's get into this week's Astro news you can use. So it's a big day today. This podcast was supposed to air 5 minutes after the Leo new moon perfected, which it did today, July 28th at 10:55 a.m. Pacific and 1:55 p.m. Eastern time. And that occurred at 5 degrees and 38 minutes in the sign of the Lion. So it's seed planting time, right? So this lunation asks that we plant seeds that'll blossom into the courage it takes to be free enough to express our authentic selves, meaning who we incarnated into this lifetime to actually become. I hope that excites you because the sun is considered dignified in Leo according to traditional astrology because that's the zodiacal archetype through which it shines brightest during the dog days of summer in the northern hemisphere. And the sun, particularly in the sign of Leo, represents the vitality of our beating heart, the exhilarating rush of our blood through our veins, the foundational basis for our inspiration, our passion, our creativity, and our courage. Courage to do what, you ask? Well, to develop into the uniquely individual solar creative selves that we came here to be, as I just noted. And in order to do that, or to achieve what Carl Jung called the process of individuation, we need to be brave. Okay, why? Well, so we can express ourselves freely. And while that may not sound like much to some or may sound very easy to others, the truth is that for many of us, the process of individuation can feel more like a Herculean task than a simple walk in the park. And that's because it takes bravery and enough trust in our special uniqueness as separate individual solar beings to be able to free ourselves from any potential judgment, criticism, anger, jealousy, control, or worse yet, rage directed at us by those who prefer we continue to hide our light behind the proverbial bushel. However, intrinsically, the sun as an archetype in and of itself, in which Leo is, when it's in Leo is dignified, it feels no fear. It simply rises in the morning, dispels the gloom of night, and ushers in a warm, joyous glow on a daily basis. In short, the sun does not hide. Sure, some clouds, may obscure it for a while, but still we can feel its heat and its warmth on basically an everyday basis. Hang on one second. Okay, sorry, just had to clear my throat. All right, so it's the warmth that this Leo new moon asks us to feel for and about ourselves now. Right? We are each our own individual suns. That's what I'm trying to get across to you. And one of the key words that describes the Leo archetype is joy. When we are who we're meant to be, meaning aware of our divinely inspired gifts, aptitudes, and talents, we can then feel free enough to express these out in the world. And no matter how you slice it, again, the sun is meant to shine. Each of us was born under a particular sign the sun was transiting through at the exact moment and location of our birth. And it's from this source of life that we experience the joy of life. As Jungian astrologer Liz Green explains it in her book, Apollo's Chariot, The Meaning of the Astrological Sun, and I'm quoting here, the physical sun is, after all, hard to miss and is the greatest thing in the heavens. It was apparent to early humans that they were dependent on this great light for their survival. However far back we go in exploring myth, we always find the sun, Green explains. The earliest human formations of religious worship are linked to the sun in every culture and in every quarter of the globe. Neolithic monuments such as Stonehenge are understood by many archaeologists to be solar temples. And even when creation myths such as those of Babylon, Egypt, and the Samaria present us with images of a primordial sea as the source of life, a solar deity invariably emerges coincident with and responsible for the creation of the world and of humanity. So, in short, and again, whoops, hang on, it's our sun that provides us with and defines our uniquely individual solar identity. Liz Green continues, quote, the sun brings potentials into flower and fruit. It actualizes possibilities and makes them real in life. The sun's light makes our personalities mature. We realize our full selves in sunlight. End quote. So think about how we describe different aspects of the sun at various points in our day, right? I mean, these are the most, when it's at its height, it's glorious, it's brilliant, it's shining, it's bright, it's illuminating, it's revealing, it's warming, it's joyful, it's calming, it's, it makes us feel, gives us that warm glow, right? Think about the sun in the winter when it's cold. Think about the joy of not having to wear so many clothes in the summer, despite the fact that right now a lot of the world is suffering from a heat wave. That's not, it's not exactly where I'm going with this. Okay. Although, Mars is approaching the North Node with Uranus, and that's another story we'll get into later. But think also about how it's impossible not to see the sun at some point in our day, our week, our month, our year. I mean, yeah, we could live in a cave, but you got to come out sometime. So, and yes, there are different climates, throughout the world and weather patterns, but the sun is a constant. So the sun will always shine because it's the giver of life. It's the key to photosynthesis and plant growth. It's the almighty physician of the sick or the depressed, and so much more. And simply put, the sun often finds us, as I said, rejoicing repeatedly every single day, just as much as it does after a long and gloomy winter. Like I said, and in the spring and the summer, when we can shed all of that extra clothing and, layers and expose ourselves, to the sun. I mean, in the Western world, I mean, I'm American, so I believe this is true for the Western world. It's like anywhere in the Northern Hemisphere, when there's sun, everybody wants to get a tan. And I guess although the seasons are switched in the Southern Hemisphere, people want to get a tan, and it makes them feel healthy, right? So it's the glowing warmth again of the sun that gives life to our beating hearts. It's the inspiration we receive when we turn our faces upward like flowers to the sun, and it ignites our passion for life, like I said. So while like all living things, we blossom into our full selves when we absorb the light of the life giver. And where there is life, there is love. The Leo archetype imbues in us a love of life, a love of self, and a love of love. This sign represents creativity, children, romance, recreational sports, and risk taking. So, given that the sun is born to shine, and that the Leo archetype shines brightest when the sun's passing through this zodiacal sign, we can understand this archetype's desire not to be obscured or hidden from the world in any way. However, Leo's archetype, in its purest sense, is not about fame and glory. Rather, it's about our ability to express our light out into the world, as I've said. And it's our ability for this personal expression that sets us each apart from one another as individuals. And this in turn connects to our innate ability to create by, being creative, a concept which, though it's often associated to the Leo archetype, is just as often misunderstood. And I've had a lot of friends and clients over the years who do not consider themselves creative. I've had conversations with people about the difference between intuition and creativity. And one person will say, oh, sure, I think I'm intuitive, but creative? Definitely not. So I've, pondered that for a while, and I think it's kind of interesting. So, a lot of people, well, okay, let's start from the beginning. All of us are creative. It's just our definition of creativity where we might differ that might lead us to say, oh, I'm not very creative, right? That's because what they're missing is that they often use that word, as I said, narrowly. And they define it only as a person who's good at or works in or has garnered acclaim in something, particularly related usually to the arts, to the theater, to dancing, to singing, to playing music, to fine arts. But what we often fail to recognize is that creativity comes in all shapes and sizes and isn't limited to things such as the fine arts. And because of that, that way of thinking, or that narrow definition of what it means to be creative, many people simply deny that they even have a light to shine out into the world. And worse yet, some people may proactively hide it out of fear of being less than, not good enough, a failure if they try, etc. But a better way to understand the Leo archetype is to realize that it's not about being the best, not about being the best artist, dancer, painter, singer, performer, athlete, teacher, healer, or whatever. Rather, it's about having the courage to simply be and be ourselves. That's to be and to express ourselves, not because we're looking for fame, acclaim, power, or fortune, or out of some sense of pride, which is obviously a word that's related to Leo often, but rather because we are the sun. It's like we are each our individual suns orbiting around each other. And as such, we simply must shine. So to do anything less is to deny our own solar power, which has nothing to do with rising into the ranks of the artistic, the political, or the corporately powerful in the outside world, or anything else that you might think is related to, being successful enough to be admired or to be lauded, or to be complimented and all that stuff. But to develop the kind of courage that we need at this Leo new moon, it's about strengthening our trust in ourselves, our purpose in life, and our actual right to exist. Now, some of you may remember last week when I talked about Chiron retrograde in Aries, we talked about the right to exist. So this Leo new moon, because Chiron stationed already and it's still retrograde for a while, it echoes the message of the wounded healer, which is retrograde in Aries, and asks us to find our voice and speak out about what's wounded us now. So having the courage to recognize the truth about ourselves is the only way to understanding that we can then stand in that truth without a sense of who we are at our core, at our heart, and what makes us special. We lack the ability, or we're in danger of losing or simply never knowing that part of us that has a unique story. And I'm here to tell you, because I'm a professional editor, I'm a writer and editor. I've been in the publishing industry since I came out of college. I'm not even going to tell you how many years ago, okay? But what I know from working with clients and authors is that each of us has an individual story. Now, the themes, the general themes between my story and your story may prove similar on the surface, but our actions and reactions within that story vary. And it's this variance that tells us that we are unique, faced with the same dilemmas, the same oppositions, the same trials and tribulations. We all respond differently because we're all different individuals. So therein lies the message of this Leo new moon, to learn to develop the courage to be true to our individual selves without censorship, to live and love naturally as we see fit in our quest to shine brightly in our own lives, regardless of what the outside world thinks of us. So the Leo desire to perform actually derives from an individual's divinely inspired essence of creativity. And just because we're alive, we all contain that essence, but not from the desire to be the best, win the race, have our face on the cover of a magazine, or to stand at the bully pulpit of the papacy or the presidency or the CEO's desk. Those can be outward manifestations of Leonine energy, and there's nothing wrong with that. But they are not the Leo archetype's actual goal. And as many of us know, allowing ourselves to develop this individual self of solar specialness, it takes guts, and it takes also revealing ourselves. And that's why the Leo archetype, in addition to including, as I mentioned, creativity, children, romance, sports, it includes risk taking. We take a risk when we attempt to leave behind our soul's past conditioning, whether it's based on earlier this lifetime or past life karma, and what was taught, told, or we were forced to believe in some way, shape, or form that, involves us being no good, not talented, not worth it, or that we're somehow damaged goods for whatever reason. And the oft received message, when we don't allow our light to shine because it's been so denigrated in some way, is that we're, the only thing we're good for is to get pushed around, to get ignored, to get overpowered or made submissive to others, or that we're just plain losers. So in short, our special gifts, talents, and aptitudes are neither seen nor recognized by others. And so we dim our own lights, or worse yet, proactively attempt to hide so that we don't attract more negative attention. So again, it takes courage to tell those naysaying voices, many of which have become ingrained into our psyches, to shut the you-know-what up. Often, these voices play in the back of our minds like a looped tape recording, and they tell us over and over and over again that we're not worthy. And that translates into self-doubt, fear, and or repression of our natural, divinely inspired spirit that normally wants to just go for it. Leo's a fire sign. It's the king of the jungle, right? It's proud. It's regal. There's a monarchist correlation with Leo. It's the sign of royalty. But instead, we tell ourselves we can't, it's not worth trying, whatever we produce will, not get any attention, nobody's going to care, so why bother? And in this way, we eclipse our own sun rather than expressing it freely and without shame, blame, guilt, and all the other things that, people have that have caused that inner tape to keep running, right? And, when we act on our inspiration, inherent in the notion that, why bother and nobody cares and we're not very good at that or whatever, the concept that it takes bravery to overcome this and rise above the voice in our head that says, I can't. And again, not to beat a dead horse, so forgive me, but we need the strength and the courage to express the essence of our sun, which is nowhere more emphasized than in the archetypal sign of Leo. And so what's happening at this Leo new moon is that it's trining Jupiter, which is still in the Mars-ruled sign of Aries. Now, you may have heard me say before that I believe Jupiter in Aries can represent the crusader. Jupiter asks us to expand into a higher level of consciousness. To me, that's its bottom line purpose. And by that, I mean stuff like, why am I here? What is my life's purpose? What am I meant to do or achieve in this lifetime? And again, achieve for your own personal satisfaction. And yes, maybe to the acclaim of others, but not necessarily. It's about you being proud of yourself. And Jupiter in Aries is the warrior, pursuing such goals independently and with gusto. So now is the time to plant seeds that will blossom into all of us becoming our own best crusader for ourselves. And as per Jupiter, to see our futures optimistically and enthusiastically in terms of our ability to develop that strength and courage necessary to shine our light. So maybe in line with Jupiter's themes, it's about taking up a new course of study or enrolling in a new program or school. Perhaps it's a creative hobby. Maybe it's about traveling. I mean, study is travel of the mind, and travel, literally getting in a car, a bus, a train, an airplane, or what have you, is foreign travel. Or just learning about our philosophical beliefs or the law. Jupiter also, it represents the law, right? So it's about justice, it's about morality. And all these are ways in which we can be both motivated and excited as about making them ways to help expand our consciousness. For example, I'm super interested in the history of the United States between 1775 and 1789, when the Supreme Court was formed and the whatever it was, the Bill of Rights was adopted, right? Because I think astrologically, since we're having the Pluto return now, that there is going to be echoes of what happened then. And I just started to reread a book that I had read before, which is very dense with facts and figures about that whole period, to try to take note more consistently of what actually occurred then, because, we have such threatened dissolution of our government, and we have increasing states wanting to separate from other states, states wanting to separate from the federal government. And that was the basic argument back then was, do the states want to join a federal union? And then once that seemed like it was the way to go, but before that, there was a huge amount of fighting. And when they did decide to join the union, then it became the arguments between people like Madison and Jefferson, who we hail as out of the French era of enlightenment, in the late or mid to late 1700s, that everybody had the right to be free, except of course for those who didn't, but anyway, like slaves and like women and, whatever. So my point here is that it is interesting to note some of these details, because we will be repeating them in some ways. And obviously, I don't even have to go into stuff that I've already talked about with all the things that the Supreme Court, I'm going to mention it later in another context, but the Supreme Court just, ruled on, like abortion and the ability to openly carry a weapon. The case was in New York, but it has implications for others. And the Roe versus Wade has implications for gay marriage and contraception and all this stuff. There's this expansion there, right? So, but what I'm trying to say is that now with the Leo new moon trining Jupiter in Aries, it's a fire trine. It gives us the opportunity to gain a better overview of the meaning of our lives and to begin to honor our special gifts, because, in order to honor them, we have to acknowledge they exist, right? And not to hide. So it benefits us all to understand at this Leo new moon that if deep down inside at our very core, we don't feel in some way special, then we become unable to take pride in ourselves regardless of what we endeavor to do in life. And developing pride in ourselves takes work for many of us. I mean, early in life or during past ones, we may have been ignored, we may have been shoved aside, we may have been passed over. I mean, I mentioned this in different words, or worse yet, denigrated, insulted, judged unworthy, or simply laughed out of town. And those things leave their mark. Those things contribute to those voices in our head that I mentioned before. So the sheer inner strength it takes to recover from such experiences signals how hard is what I called before the Herculean task of recovering our pride and self after having sustained such neglect or abuse in early life or past lifetimes. So what do we do when we feel afraid? Well, as I've mentioned several times, normally we hide. And as Shakespeare said, therein lies the rub. So, how do you shine your inspirational or inspired, special, unique, solar creative light when it's hiding behind that bushel or in the closet or behind mama's skirt or in daddy's shadow? And what happens when we hide? We lose our connection to our solar consciousness, our attachment to our vitality, our beating heart, and as I said before, the rush of our blood, the inspiration that drives us toward our quest, our passion. What quest? Well, the quest to individuate or to become exactly who we came here to be. Now, when Jupiter, which archetypally represents philosophy, as I mentioned before, study, morality, religion, and the law, stations retrograde a few hours today after after today's exact Leo new moon, it provides us the opportunity to become more conscious of our own morality. And here's how Jungian astrologer Erin Sullivan puts it in her book Retrograde Planets Traversing the Inner Landscape. And here I quote: "If planets can be said to have an intent, Jupiter's purpose in its retrograde cycle is to connect one with a deeper and more personal sense of justice, not jurisprudence, but that which is correct for one's integral balance and health. Often, our own inner sense of what is right and wrong is unconsciously suppressed, subordinated to accepted values and moral codes, whether these are social or defined within specific relationships. Jupiter's retrograde cycle is the annual opportunity to contemplate and reflect upon aspects of our life in which we need to explore our personal code of ethics. In one sense, we experience our integrity more instinctively when Jupiter is retrograde, and though we may be incapable of formulating or articulating the eternal review at the time, there is a correction at work unconsciously." And she continues, "With this in mind, it may be that what was initially removed at the station retrograde, be that a cherished idea, a relationship, a contract, money, or time, was not altogether necessary to support one's ego, but was in fact damaging to the ego's fullest expression according to its own measurement of correctness or appropriateness. At this time, the greater self has a design not consonant with the ego's wants and stimulates the activity of a self-correcting device." And here's where it gets more interesting. Well, this is where I say, I mean, I've said this and I'll say it again. Jupiter's purpose, as I said before, is to expand our consciousness. What is it about expand? What does it want to expand our consciousness about? It wants to talk to us about our ego and ask us to go deep about whether what our ego, which is formed by the outside world, those who told, taught, or forced us to believe certain things through society and the mores of our times, whether what that ego, which has been thus influenced, thinks it wants, versus what our innate, as she said, sense of justice and moral integrity knows the soul needs. So it's a difference, in my opinion, between what we want, what we think we want, and what we actually need. Because I always say Jupiter doesn't give us what we want. always. I mean, sometimes he does, and then we're on the right path. But he always gives us what we need. So, as I was saying, here's where it gets more interesting, and here's more of a quote from Aaron Sullivan in this book. One of the pathologies inherent in Jupiter is inflation. And I added, gosh, where have we been hearing that lately? And Sullivan continues, in the course of its direct transit, the planet can create a sense of inflated purpose, and when it is retrograde, it can stimulate the opposite, ego deflation. End quote. Now, did anyone see today's news with the latest like this out of today's New York Times? And I'm quoting their headline and their first graph. GDP report shows U.S. economy shrank again. Gross domestic product fell by 0.2% in the second quarter after a 0.4% decline in the first, fueling fears that a recession may have already begun. So let's note also that Jupiter retrogrades for approximately 4 months every year, and every year we don't experience necessarily either inflation or recession, right? And then let's note that Jupiter's retrograde begins today on July 28th at 8 degrees and 43 minutes of Aries, and that it will re-enter Pisces on October 21st, retrograde, and station direct again on November 23rd at 28 degrees and 48 minutes of Pisces. And finally, Jupiter will re-enter Aries on December 20th. Now, there's something here that Sullivan writes about Jupiter's retrograde periods in general that I felt was worth the mention. So again, I quote, because one feels unable to trust one's environment to produce the desired results, right? Nothing is working, right? She says external support systems become less meaningful and one's inner wisdom deepens. Again, back to what I said before, the external support systems are empirical, rational, logical, and that's the domain of the ego. But with Jupiter's retrograde, when we feel, as she says, unable to trust the outside environment, our ego constructs, then we develop inner wisdom. And she continues, circumstances might advocate withdrawal from a situation in order to receive inner counseling, rather than barreling ahead, provoking, plotting, challenging, or pressuring completion. Prevailing over adversity enhances one's sense of worth, but attempting to maneuver the impossible amplifies a sense of failure. That makes me think of salmon swimming upstream, right? So Sullivan therefore advises, and again I quote, accepting flexibility in one's overall affairs or long-range planning that could allow for a more natural course of maturation, aiding the process of continuity. So, let the tide take you, right? There's only so much you can fight. I remember having a reading years ago with Rob Hand, and he said to me, throw it at the wall. And if it sticks, then follow it up. If it doesn't stick, it's not the way to go. And I think that's probably good general advice for any retrograde period, but basically, what Sullivan is pointing out here, because when we're working on projects, when you have plans for the future, and all of a sudden somebody pulls out, or all of a sudden the funding is gone, or all of a sudden, we thought we'd get the loan or whatever, it's not as much about saying, well, I have to continually pursue this. I mean, we have to look at the rest of one's chart to actually determine whether you're supposed to give up during Jupiter retrograde. It's not really a give up time. It's more a time of all the re's, which is the same thing we always talk about with Mercury, right? Review, reanalyze, rethink, restructure, re-edit, rewrite, whatever. So it's a re-period in terms of whether, if things seem to disappear externally, how can we get in touch with our inner self to figure out what really has true meaning for us? Now, based on what I just read that Sullivan said, I thought it would be interesting to point out that some astrologers, and some of you may have seen this on social media and other places, some have already pointed out that they think we may see an end to the war in Ukraine by the time Jupiter stations direct around the end of November, if not before, because the course of the plans is not going well. And, obviously there can be a little bias in that because we're saying, well, Russia is the aggressor, right? So if they plan to take over and conquer all of Ukraine, and now that's clear they're not going to do that, then, they may turn around and go, oh, wait, things aren't working out externally the way that we hoped they would, the way that we were optimistic they would, the way we were enthusiastic about, right? So just a quick example there. Now, because this Leo new moon both trines Jupiter and, as I just mentioned, Jupiter stations retrograde only hours later, then we might then surmise that some of our plans, our individual plans and projects, or inflated expectations, just gave you Putin's example, may become, well, a bit deflated during this period. So in terms of the economy, that remains to be seen, of course, because we are in some kind of uncharted times. Everybody is always looking at patterns from the past, the financial guys and all that stuff. But, some of the financial powers that be seem to say high inflation is the result of having put more cash in the hands of folks who then went out and spent it, particularly during the pandemic, right? Combined with the supply chain shortages, which is a deflation, right, which stymied our ability to get our hands on the goods that people wanted to buy. And now, in turn, the Federal Reserve here in the U.S., of course, needed to increase interest rates, which it did just for the second time yesterday. And the first time, I don't even know, it was in June, I think, or May. It was recent. And both times it was 3/4 of a point, which is raising our mortgages and raising the interest rates on any loans or whatever. So they did that to ward off a coming recession. So we all have to kind of stay tuned, right, to see whether the recession is actually going to come as a measure of deflation while Jupiter is retrograde. And I'm not a financial astrologer, so I can't tell you that I've studied Jupiter's retrogrades and finances, through the periods of history. I would refer everyone to Mitchell Lewis and people like that who excel at that particular topic. But I think we will all be waiting with bated breath to see what's what with the economy over the long term. I just think it pays to keep in mind that when Jupiter's retrograde, we might not expect the market to go into bear territory, or anything that we have. And that part of the strength and the courage that we need is just to stay the long course, right? Because Jupiter is also about the bigger picture, the overall plan, and strategy. So now is the time to review your strategy for whatever plans you had in place, especially those that may start to falter. And then to adjust those plans. If abandoning them is the best thing to do, then that's fine. And if not, it just needs tweaking or adjustment, then we do that. All right. And this also will factor, of course, into the upcoming U.S. midterm elections as people vote with their pocketbooks. And now I'm talking again about inflation and recession. So despite that truism, however, there's much more online with these elections based on, there's much more on the line, is what I meant to say, with these elections based on the recent Supreme Court decisions that I mentioned, banning abortion, allowing open carriage of guns, and thwarting the Environmental Protection Agencies, it's an agency of the federal government, from regulating carbon emissions and attempting to reduce the threat of climate change, as we're all going through this heat wave. I don't know about the southern hemisphere, but certainly within the northern one, right? Western Europe and the America and all that. My son is out in Portland for the summer, and I just texted him this morning because I saw an article from yesterday. I mean, I knew they were having a heat wave in the Pacific Northwest, but I didn't know if the house he's living in has air conditioning. So, those of you who have kids like, who were the first generation to get their cell phones when they were 11 or 12 or 13, that, they don't usually answer you. If you text them, they just ignore you. So he got back to me right away and he said, "I'm okay. We have air conditioning." And I was like, "Oh, thank God." Anyway, and meanwhile, some of us, I'm in New Jersey. I didn't go out for like 4 days, until yesterday when the weather broke because it was so hot. All right. Well, I digress. So anyway, it's within the range of these issues that I've just mentioned that we may go deepest while Jupiter's retrograde to determine our own individual sense of justice. Right. And there's a Mercury in Leo square to Uranus and Taurus today, too, that hasn't perfected yet. And if any of you have noticed, and I certainly have noticed it in putting together my notes for this show, not to say that this isn't part of my norm, but I don't have the aspect natally, is Mercury square Uranus is, can disrupt our concentration, thoughts, ideas come very rapidly. Revelations can arrive at supersonic speed. So it's a time for the remaining few hours of this to beware of rash judgments, impulsive decisions that can lead to accidents, and to just generally kind of stay away from any explosive volatility as, as we're at this Leo new moon, which is fiery, right? So, I went into some length and some depth about Uranus joining the North Node in Taurus last week, so I'll just refer you back to that. But Mercury square Mars, which happened on the 26th, which is now 2 days ago, was potentially volatile. So it's still better to move inward now that we've got several planets retrograde, and I mentioned those last week, including now Jupiter joining the pack. Hang on, and I'll reiterate which planets those are. Give me 1 second. I need my glasses. Hang on. It's the end of July, and we have Jupiter just going. We have Saturn already, Neptune, Pluto, and I had mentioned last week that Vesta and Chiron, of course, and we also now have Juno retrograde. So 4 planets and 3 asteroids. It's going to slow things down a little, but this happens every single year, so it's not like a major stuff. So I wanted to mention, too, before I run out of time, that Mercury in Leo is square, and that's today and tomorrow, both the mean and the true Scorpio South Node and the Taurus North Node. And that news or other communication, particularly arguments or things that may provoke arguments, can spark certain challenges now. And in addition, the good part is we may be more easily able to purge an old idea that no longer serves us well. However, watch for issues around travel, logistics, and young people, which may frustrate us as well. So bear in mind that we're still, like, it's happening now, right? So it's been waxing over the last couple of days. And here's how Celeste Teal, who is someone whose book I read from last week about the Uranus and Mars North Node conjunctions, and she authored a book called Lunar Nodes, Discover Your Soul's Karmic Mission, she describes transiting Mercury square to the nodes. And although she's talking about a natal transit, I think we can all still extrapolate much general meaning from this. And she says, and hang on, because I'm going to read directly from her book. When a planet squares the nodes, it's kind of more equivalent to it being conjunct the south node than the north node, or to being less positive than negative. So she interprets it this way: Mercury, conjunct the south node, meaning also in dire aspect, as they would say, to the south node, wrapping up of business matters with logistics to handle. News, information, or communication. Oh, I said that already, didn't I? Yeah, that's because I started writing it down and then I didn't finish. Okay. sorry, the past is somehow significant. There's a need to resolve or update something from the past. Data coming in and the present circumstances may allow you to unload or purge an old idea. Well, data coming in, we just read you about the GDP, right? The past is significant, which is interesting too. She says, nerves become frazzled by errors in schedules, travel-related upsets, dealing with agents, etc. Young people play a significant role. Frustrations felt in the matters of the house ruled by Mercury. That's for each of us in our individual charts. And what I was noticing is an interesting couple of just minor interesting things. One is that today or yesterday it was reported that Senator Joe Manchin, the Democrat who was the holdout for all of, Biden's Build Back Better plan, changed his mind and announced that he'd support an energy bill and raising taxes on the wealthy. I didn't get time to read the article, so I don't know if he meant wealthy corporations or wealthy individuals or both. So I'm a little at a loss there, but it signifies a change in attitude, right? And then there was the woman, I don't know if it was yesterday also or the day before, at the Dallas Love Field Airport. Oh, it was Monday, who went into the airport and went into the bathroom or something and changed clothes and then came out with a gun and started shooting. Now, again, I didn't have time to read the whole article. I don't think she killed anyone and police captured her and now she's in custody. But talk about messing up logistics, right? All the flights were canceled and everything. It was just a weird thing. And then also just before airtime, and hang on, let me find this. I noticed that where is it? Hang on. The Republican National Committee just told Donald Trump that if he runs for president again, now he's been threatening to declare his candidacy for 2024. This is saying they'll stop paying his legal bills. The RNC has been paying all of his legal bills. And that's reportedly because despite the fact that the RNC has paid nearly $2 million to law firms representing Trump as part of his defense against personal litigation and government investigations, an RNC official told ABC News that as soon as Trump would announce he's running for president, the payments would stop because the party has a quote, a neutrality policy that prevents it from taking sides in the presidential primary. And the story I read was out of Daily Kos, which is a Democratic-run media site. Anyway, I think it's very interesting. The other thing is that I noticed that I thought this was great. On the day that, Mercury is almost exact squaring the nodes, PBS reported on this day about 247 years ago, which we know also is roughly the Pluto return, right? The Second Continental Congress established the U.S. postal system. So I thought to myself, how funny is it that I was just in Manhattan last Saturday visiting a friend, and I drove by the main post office building there, and I looked up, and I've always loved, because I used to work near that area, I've always loved the U.S. Postal Service's motto, which is carved into the facade of the building on the top of the building, and it reads as follows. Quote, neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds. And that somehow that line just always sounded like a piece of poetry to me. But anyway, I just think it's funny. The other thing too, Mercury squaring the nodes and Jupiter starting its retrograde, is that One American News, the very, very conservative right-wing news cable station, there was an article in the Times the other day. It said OAN, a dependable Trump promoter, faces a death blow. And it says, after Verizon drops the network at the end of this week, OAN's cable TV audience will shrink dramatically. The future of One American News, which established itself as a powerful voice in conservative media by promoting some of the most outlandish falsehoods about the 2020 election. Remember, Mercury's in Leo, right? He's anything from a self-promoter to a buffoon, right? Is in serious doubt. I mean, he takes his, Mercury and Leo can take what it has to say a little too seriously, is in serious doubt as major carriers drop it from their lineup and defamation lawsuits threaten to drain its finances. By the end of this week, the cable network will have lost its presence in some 20 million homes this year. And the most recent blow came from Verizon, which will stop carrying OAN on its Fios television service starting Saturday. That's day after tomorrow. That will starve the network of a major stream of revenue. Again, Jupiter retrograde. The fees it collects from Verizon, which counts roughly 3.5 million cable subscribers. In April, OAN was dropped by AT&T's DirecTV, which has about 15 million subscribers. So they basically just decimated, the channel, which as far as I'm concerned is a wonderful thing. So that kind of deflation I'll take, right? Anyway, I'm out of time, folks. I want to thank everyone so much for joining me today. And I hope you found the information presented here helpful as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. Please be sure to join me next week on August 4th for another episode of Karmic Evolutions, Astrologically Speaking. Until then, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier.